Nice. Thank you very much. Good. So, first of all, I'm surprised. It's good to hear that Angular is in South Africa, because usually when I'm present, people are not so happy about Angular in general. So I lost a few friends because of that, but it's good that that's not the case this time. So let me start a little bit by telling you a little bit about myself. My name is Juan. I'm originally from Colombia. And at the Colombia, if you've never heard of, it's the place where Colorado, Shakira, Juanes, and other not so relevant people actually are from. And back in Colombia, I used to run a community as well. It was Angular Medellin. And we'd run it for like 2 or 3 years or several years already. And then we even run a conference called Colombia, which was the first Angular conference in the whole Latin America. And for me, I can understand what the organizers are going through today. And I have to say they're doing a magnificent job. So keep it up. And what happened is that 2 years ago, or 1 year and a half, I decided to move to Austria, as Sylvia mentioned. And here in Austria, I'm just doing it out of growing as a person, as a professional. It's been quite a journey. And here I'm working for a company called Parkside, where I'm a senior software engineer. And well, you can check it out. But other than that, you got to know that I'm also a Google developer expert in Angular and web technologies. So that means that I'm really passionate about helping people learn about Angular or web in general. So if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to me through my contact details. I'll share them later. So just so you know. Cool. So with that presentation set, let's start with what we came here for. We came here for the problem. What problem is this talk about? Are the lessons of Angular, what are they about? Well, it turns out that many of you, when you started working with Angular, you might have noticed that doing it feels like this. Take a look. It's just like you're doing it, but it's quite cumbersome at the beginning and maybe slightly difficult then, and it's hard to get. The learning curve is quite long. So I do understand this feeling and I can resonate with it. But at the enterprise level, the whole game changes. Take a look at this GIF that clearly expresses how it feels to work with Angular in big projects. Now, when I tried it, of course, I didn't have quite the same results. This is me trying Angular in big projects with hundreds of components and so on. So it was not quite what I was expecting. And that's what I came here today to talk to you about those things I learned in my journey of working with Angular, which this journey in particular started about 4 years ago in September 2016, when for the first time I started working with Angular 2 back then. And yeah, thanks. I'm glad you like the GIFs. What happens is that throughout 4 years, I worked for 2 companies in which I had the opportunity to work in really big size projects in really interesting industries, such as, for example, the real estate, banking, the sales industry, or even the medical industry in Switzerland. And of course, these projects involve plenty of people, so plenty of code, thousands or hundreds of thousands of lines of code. And of course, I also work on small projects in my own website, which I haven't finished. But certainly, I accumulated some experience of what are those things that usually do not work out so well when you're using Angular and how you can avoid them. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. Today, I'm going to share 5 lessons that I learned across 4 years that you will be able to consider in the next project you work on or in your team right now, if that's the case. So feel free to shoot any questions if they happen at any time. I'll be happy to reply them now or afterwards in the Q&A session. So let's go for the lesson number 1, abstractions. Abstractions. You heard them before, and imagine in your local community, in your region, the local bakery tells you, hey, we want to create our own website. So would you mind doing that for us? And you choose Angular to do it, and it's quite simple and straightforward. because it's a small website, couple of links and so on. So that should be easy and relatively easy to do. But when you're doing it for big enterprises, let's call this big building a big enterprise because that's what I have in mind for big enterprises, the whole picture changes. Then you have a lot of different challenges that you never expected before. And that's what we're going to dive in today. One of the things that happen when you're working with Angular or any other framework, doesn't matter, is that you're writing code over and over with several people across weeks, months, or years. And what happened ultimately is that you have millions of codes that might as well be duplicated in your project. But of course, if you are like me, you might have heard of DRY, which obviously stands for drive responsibly, which you should, but I don't know how to drive, so that doesn't apply to me. But regardless, that doesn't actually, it means drive responsibly. It means don't repeat yourself, which is like this pattern that tells you that you shouldn't repeat your code. You shouldn't write it several places because, well, naturally, if you write a piece of code several places and you wrote it incorrectly, then you need to fix it several times. And the same thing happens if you're actually writing code that you want to extend. So you have to extend it several times. And that's something you want to avoid. I mean, maybe duplicating code once, it's okay, but several times might be a problem. Now, of course, web frameworks nowadays, not just Angular, offer you solutions for you to avoid this kind of challenges, such as, for example, being able to create components so that the same button you don't have to write over and over again. And sometimes you might even create more interesting components, we call them shared components, that might be able to hold different functionality, like for different use cases. So those shared components usually involved inputs and outputs, so how you communicate with your parent. I guess in a React, this is called props or so on, content projection, and conditional logic sometimes. So you have all these shared components, which are anything but abstraction layers that allows you to actually avoid repeating yourself, allows you to actually save yourself from writing code. But this is the plot twist. What happens is, as stated by Sandy Metz, the run abstraction usually costs more than the duplication per se. So prefer duplication over the run abstraction. Sometimes that's the case. But I realize it's more the case than I thought of. So throughout these 4 years of experience, I realized that I always aim somehow for coming up with these complex abstractions so that I can actually avoid duplicating a couple of lines of codes. But what happened is that those abstractions were so complex that my teammates had trouble understanding what they do. And when the new requirements came up, guess what? At that point, I had already lost flexibility because the abstraction was so complex that it was hard to extend. If I had not created the abstraction, but still duplicated those few lines of code, then the flexibility would have remained. So one good case for Angular, next time you're going to work on a project, it's tables. Tables is one of those common examples that you will often see where you might want to create an abstraction. If you think about it, a big project, big enterprise having an application will likely involve tables to display data, whatever. And if you have this table several times, you'll say, well, I want to, create a shared component. In this case, this is a material table. But when you start creating the shared components as material tables, what happens is that you lost all the flexibility. Likely, tables will sometimes look very different, sometimes have different logic involved. And that's what I found. So at that moment, I realized, no, I don't think I will go for making material tables or tables in general a shared component, because this is often a case for creating the run abstraction. And it's quite better sometimes to just go with the duplicate of code, even if it's just a couple of lines of code. That was the first lesson that I got. So next time somebody comes to me and tells me, why don't we make an abstraction out of it? Then I just give them the Jimmy Fallon look of, I don't know. I mean, yes, maybe, but maybe no. So yeah, consider that in mind. Cool. So that was lesson number one. We're going to have 4 more lessons. If you like it so far, just give me a thumbs up in the chat so I can make sure that you're having fun and everything is going well. Good. So let's go up to lesson number 2. So lesson number 2, it's called NgRx. So some of you might never heard of NgRx before. That's fine, and you're lucky. But you have certainly dealt with state management. So even if you don't know what state management is, I have an analogy for you to know what it is. Analogies was part of a speech from Wallace, who says, like one fish says to another, morning boys, how is the water? And they say like, the hell is water? And this happens when we're so immersed in something that we don't really realize we're actually using it or needing it. And that's the case with state management. You're always dealing with state management, at least in the front end. But you don't always know it because sometimes it's so simple that like you don't care. Defining those variables in that class is already part of state management. It's just that when you're working, again, in big enterprises, state management actually becomes a requirement, a specific requirement you need to kind of follow. So what happens when you're working on front end, right? And you have this big application, hundreds of components and all of them. What happens is that those components need to communicate with each other. To help you understand this image, I have a graph here where we have 2 trees. Each node of those trees is a component in your application. It could be a button, could be a pop-up, a dialog, a table. And those components need to communicate with each other. So in the left, you have the typical approach that you could go with, which is like a child component communicates to a parent component, and so on and so forth. And it works. On the right, we have Redux, which you might have heard of before. It's very popular. And with Redux, you have a single source of truth, which is called a store, where you just put your state and all the other components kind of dispatch actions and subscribe to it to know what it's going on. Now, Redux is pretty good. It's amazing. And thanks to the people who created it, for sure. For Angular, what happened is that they created a specific implementation. They just combined Angular with Redux and a little bit of RxJS, and they made NgRx. So that's what NgRx is. At the end of the day, it's just a library that helps you manage your state in Angular application. That's all it is. The thing is that NgRx has a very interesting architecture, which some of you might find nice and really good. But I remember the first time I saw this architecture, I was like, I don't really know anything about programming because I cannot follow this. Why did I spend 5 years in university? I don't understand what a reducer is, honestly. So I would resonate with you if you're a little bit lost in this Redux structure or architecture. But the point here is that when you're working with NgRx and Angular, you usually end up with this very, very big trade-off in NgRx, which is boilerplate code. It's a lot of code that you have to write, and which ultimately end up looking like this. If you want to create a component, which is called Pokemon, then you need to create several files: the actions, the effects, the reducers, selectors, the state, the meta reducers, meta selectors, you name it. There's plenty out there you need to do. So I honestly believe that if you're going to work in a really massive application and you need to create these files, or you create these files to ensure better maintainability, readability, scalability, well, then so be it. That's nothing wrong with that. So there's actually nothing wrong with NgRx per se. The problem is when you're working with a team who perhaps doesn't know how to do it properly, because it's not easy and it's fine. So when I was in my career, right, this 4 years working with Angular, of course, coming up with the idea of using NgRx, what happened to me is that sometimes my team members, they didn't quite know, they kind of understood it, but not so good that they couldn't actually create or follow the patterns that NgRx suggests you to do. So naming the actions in a certain way, not duplicating your actions, not reusing them, so on and so forth. And what happens is that if we go back to the analogy that I showed you before, where state management is this water in which fish is floating through, then you might end up, when you don't have a team that knows how to handle it, with several state management solutions, hybrid approaches, all in one place. And of course, that's very complicated because then some parts of your application, sorry for speaking so fast, I just get too excited when I'm talking about this. I'll just slow down. But what happens is that when you have a team like this, right, state management just becomes something that you use in certain parts of the application, but not in certain others. And you have then behavior subjects there, and you have local storage here, and so on. So it's key to remember that NgRx is great and it works, and Redux as well. Just make sure your team is fully capable of embracing the whole NgRx concept architecture, and that they understand it and that they can follow it. Maybe in the future, the tooling that we have for implementing NgRx will improve, and it will make sure that we actually follow the guidelines that we are supposed to. But that's not the case today. So next time somebody comes to you in a meeting and tells you that they want to use NgRx for a project, just use the Jimmy Fallon look and think about it. Okay, that was lesson number 2. Let's go for lesson number 3. This one is called diversions, but it's not the kind of diversions of fun and joy, because at least in Spanish, diversions means like funny stuff to do. I guess in English as well. But I mean those that are meant to take a different direction that you're supposed to, like divert from an actual path. It happened to me with a client that comes to me or to my company and tells us, look, we have customized our build pipeline of our Angular application, which clearly is gigantic. So instead of looking like this, looks quite different. There's plenty of scripts going around because, of course, they are a big enterprise. They're whatever, call it evil corp, doesn't matter. They likely have really complex systems that they need to implement. So this particular project have a custom Webpack configuration, custom grunt and gulp tests, scripts all over. And they had a bug and I needed to work on it. And of course, it wasn't nice at all. Thanks, Simon. Glad you like lesson 2. Appreciate it. So, right. So what happens is that they have these tools in it, and I have to work on it. And yeah, it was not good. It was a nightmare. And what happens is that Angular, which comes with a CLI, allows you to actually scaffold new projects and so on, but also helps you update your versions of Angular on the fly. Like you just run a command and it gets updated. Sure, you need to do some modifications here and there, but it's done. But they couldn't, because they completely hijacked the build process of Angular to meet their requirements, which is fine. I mean, some companies need it. There's nothing you can do about it. But the more you divert from the approach that Angular suggests you to use, the more complicated things can get. And honestly, I understand where this sentiment is coming from, because 10 years ago, this is what you would say when you were going to build an app. You would say like, I should have customized my app today, right? Like you could do anything. You could install Yeoman, create an application with index.html, and then add some templating with Jade, and then you have Lodash if you wanted to. You have also all these dependencies that you could add at any time, jQuery, and any plugin to achieve any visual stuff or animations. You would just create a Frankenstein every week, which at that point, again, was fine, right? But nowadays, in the era of the frameworks, they say, okay, look, we're going to give you a lot of things out of the box, but you should stick to it. That just will make it easier for you. So, for example, Angular is really prone for, or really advises you to use observables. You can still use promises for sure, but suggested to use observables. So try to stick to it, because as you can see in the graph, even if you don't understand observables, you can see you have plenty of more things which you can do with observables. Indeed. Same thing if you need to update the DOM. You can, of course, today you can install jQuery in an Angular project and do anything you want to do with jQuery for sure. But maybe the Angular way, it's actually advisable at this point. So try to not to divert so much for it. So next time somebody comes to you and tells you that they want to come up with new dependencies and new things into the application, perhaps custom configurations, just give them the Jimmy Fallon look. Or at least that's what I learned to do, which this look, just to remind all of you, doesn't mean no. It means maybe. Feel like. Right. So moving on. Let's go to lesson number 4. Rockstars. So look, let me tell you something. And I want to be honest with you and frank with you. When I created this talk, I only consider technical lessons, things that I learned that were strictly related to code. But these 4 years also taught me non-technical stuff. And this is one that I want to share with you today. It's about rockstars developers. Take a look at this graph, for example. This is the building of Evil Corp again. And then they're saying, we're looking for a rockstar developer to join our team. And clearly the developer is very capable of doing rockstar stuff, which some of us might do. But anyway, so the point here is that rockstar developers is this concept that we often find where are these people that have millions of followers. It's people who have plenty of gold medals in Stack Overflow. And of course, their GitHub contribution graph looks like this. And those are rockstar developers. Those are like, wow, oh my God, incredible. But then I thought, okay, that's cool. That's fine. I like that. But there must be more types of developers out there. So I came up with a really fancy graph that I'm about to show you. It's this one. Take a look for it for a moment. All right. So what you can see, let's start in the corner left bottom. So we have the troll developer, right? It's a developer that it's not very exposed. So it's like in the shadows of forums and Stack Overflow and has a negative impact. It's that person that might be saying, hey, your question is stupid, or how dare you posted that code? It's clearly wrong, and so on. Then we have the billion developers that are those developers that you might actually follow on social media and who have plenty of followers, but still have a very negative opinion about certain things or may not be so accurate and might create a lot of chaos. You know them. But anyway, what we're going to focus on today is that we have also a third category, which is called the quiet developer, which as opposed to the rockstar developer, doesn't have as much exposure, yet they have still a strong, positive impact on people and communities. Quiet developers are developers that are more interested in being followed by their team than by a crowd on Twitter. Quiet developers are developers who don't have opinions for everything. They are completely fine saying, look, I'm pretty good at Angular, but if you put, I don't know, Java in front of me, honestly, I cannot say anything about it. I don't know Java. That's the point. Simple. Simple as that. I don't know it all. They also assume good faith. When they join a legacy project, they don't just come up and start judging the previous developers and the decisions they made. They ask about the concerns and the boundaries they had at that point to understand better the kind of solution they're dealing with. And last but not least, quiet developers often prefer readability over one-liners. So again, one of the lessons that I also came across is 4 years of experience in Angular working with big projects and big teams is that, I mean, rockstar developers, hiring them, nice. They're important. They're necessary. They might be connected right now listening to this presentation, and you are valuable and you're welcome. But we also welcome quiet developers, and they are also necessary. All right, that was lesson number 4. Let's finish this and wrap it out with lesson number 5. Subscriptions. If you think of a subscription as a purse, then a subscription inside a subscription looks like this, which clearly by the picture doesn't look nice, unless you're into really fashion, which you might like. That's fine, I accept you. But yeah, honestly, this is something you should avoid. If you are not following what I'm talking about, subscriptions inside subscriptions and memory leaks and race conditions, that's fine. What happens is that in Angular, we are very tied to using observables and RxJS and operators and asynchronous programming. And often you will realize that even up to today, many people are still subscribing in the component when they don't really need to, when they could just subscribe in the template, or subscribing several times where they can just merge map or concat map or fork join their observables into one. Some people do not even know how to combine observables, which is something vital when you're working with a transactional application where you have several requests coming and going. Subscriptions are something to be careful with because you don't always need them, despite what they say. So next time somebody comes up to you and coming up with 4 or more subscriptions, same, given the Jimmy Fallon look. Maybe you don't need to subscribe. Maybe you don't need it at all. All right, so those were the 5 lessons. Let's just do a quick recap so we can wrap it up, this conversation. Maybe if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If you don't have any questions, it's because everything was very clear, which is great. But let's wrap it up with this slide. One thing that happened is that you might notice that I combined these 2 characters, the all the things meme and the Jimmy Fallon look. And bear in mind that all the things meme, these people coming up with abstractions and all these things, they are not doing it out of bad faith. They're actually doing it out of good faith. They're just thinking of solutions, coming up with them, just like I was a couple of years ago, coming up with more abstractions and so on. Just be mindful. Next time, ask yourself, does it make sense? Does it make sense to have abstractions, more abstractions? Does it make sense to implement NgRx? Maybe there are other state management systems that are easier to handle. Does it make sense to divert from Angular and its approach to doing things? Does it make sense to hire only rock stars? And does it make sense to subscribe? Maybe not. So yeah, that's what I want to leave with you today. Just ask yourself, does it make sense? That's my biggest lesson for this 4 years of experience. Thank you very much. Open to questions, and thanks for listening.
Cool. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I think you repeated a lot of things that I've also learned in my professional career. So.
Oh, really? Nice.
It feels like we're on the right track. Yeah. So my first question, before I open the question to the audience, let me ask you: how often do you use the Jimmy Fallon gesture in your professional day?
I mean, I think every time I do a refinement, like in the Scrum methodology, Agile, every time we're going through the user stories and the tickets, and we're saying like, okay, this ticket, how many points is it? And I'll say, I think it could be this amount of points because I would duplicate the code instead of create an abstraction. And then you start with this conversation where they say, yeah, but you can just create a shared component and so on. I'm like, no, let's not go that way. So very often, I'll say every 2 weeks at least.
Cool. All right, let me read you a few questions from the audience. If you want to follow along, there is a Q&A tab at the top of your screen, but I'll just read them to you. Right. The first one is, why Angular, why not React? For beginners in JS, would you recommend Angular or React for front-end?
Absolutely.
It's a question.
No, it's an amazing question. No, thank you very much for asking this. So one of the advices I like to give to people is that one should learn, I would suggest, anything that allows you to continue growing as a professional, as a developer, where you are in the moment you are in your career and with the opportunities that are in the market at this moment. So if you live in a place where Angular is very demanded and there are jobs all over for Angular, well, you can go with that, learn Angular, and if you eventually do not like it, then you will have the opportunity and the means to actually go and search for a job in another place. But if you're in a place where Angular is not really needed, everybody prefers React in the industry, and there are not many tutors or mentors that can help you, then it doesn't make much sense because it will be way more difficult, even if you like it. So I will be more practical in that approach. I will totally not opt for one for all cases, not at all. And who knows, maybe eventually you will learn both of them. So even better.
Let me follow up on this. Would you agree that Angular has a slightly harder startup curve than React, or is it just my perception?
I used to think that when I lived in Colombia, but when I moved to Austria, I started to see different patterns and data from different companies of different sizes trying different things. So honestly, at this point, I don't know. If anything, I would suggest taking a look at ThoughtWorks and Gartner, who are usually those reporters that tells you more clear information about what startups prefer or big companies prefer.
Okay. All right, the next question. That one is a tricky one. I'm not too familiar with Angular, but is it possible to use it with ASP.NET MVC?
I don't know.
Very different.
I don't know. I mean, I do know what MVC is. I do know what .NET is. But usually the way I've used it before is like on the back end, and then you just enable some endpoints and you fetch them or request them from your Angular standalone application. It might be possible to combine them, but I don't know.
Maybe just, for a newbie who's not heard much of Angular, how would you describe Angular, kind of the elevator speech, 2 sentences?
You're killing me, Sylvia. All right. I'll give you the elevator speech. Angular is a toolbox that will help you quickly solve many of the problems you will find in web in just one framework. That's what it is. Many of the problems that you will find in web, Angular will allow you to fix them really quickly, so you don't have to think them from scratch. You're already given everything you need. That's what I will say.
That is a killer answer, and I think that enables everybody to make up their mind. Cool. Thank you so much. All right, 2 more questions. Is it wise, okay, to use older versions of Angular in projects?
Absolutely. I mean, you're totally fine doing it. I mean, it's just like, it's a matter of, it's like using an older version of a browser, right? Like it's up to you. I mean, if you want to have the latest features, you might want to upgrade. But if you don't need to and you're fine with whatever version you're using, that's fine. Except if you're using AngularJS, which is no longer supported, and of course documentation is dropping, so you might want to switch to Angular, which is the newer version overall. Yeah.
Cool. All right, and the last one for now. What state management would you recommend for smaller projects?
Good question. I don't have work experience with other state management libraries other than NgRx. I have tried before NgXS, like for small projects or to prototype, but I don't have work experience, so I might not be qualified to tell you. But if I have to create a small project right now and I have to choose one approach, I will go with behavior subjects, which is no library. It's just you creating in your own services, behavior objects, behavior subjects, objects that allows you to kind of keep your state completely in sync all the time. So no library at all. That's how I would go.
Awesome. Very good. There was a lot of feedback during the talk. I think you kept an eye on it, but probably didn't follow along. So I don't know, maybe you can chat a little bit to people afterwards directly. I think everybody enjoyed this very much. I certainly enjoyed it. So nice. Thank you so much for your time today.